Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday morning. My name is Jasmine Randall, and I'm the Program Manager at THL for Tennessee Health Link. Welcome to our June webinar on addressing self-harm and self-injury among the Tennessee Health Link members. Today, our presenters are Mandy Ryan, Ashley Hall, Cindy Cochran from Centerstone. Mandy, you may be familiar with, is the Director of Healthcare Innovations and is currently one of the leads at Centerstone for Tennessee Health Link. She also serves as the Project Director for the SAMHSA Primary and Behavioral Health Integration Grant, and she is also accredited from the Commission as a CARF. Their facility is accredited as a CARF facility. She has a master's degree in nursing and leadership and also a nursing degree from Baptist Health College, as well as a bachelor's degree in biology. We have Ashley Hall, who is a certified prevention specialist. She is also the marketing coordinator for Centerstone. She has been in service with them since 2001, starting off as case management for the youth and progressing from there. She was named Teacher Council of the Year by Centerstone and the American Read Association. She completed her studies at Belmont and also has certifications as well. And she also attended Tribeca for her master's degree. We have Cindy, who is a coordinator at Centerstone for intensive in-home therapy and school-based therapy for Davidson, Rutherford, and Wilson counties. She also works with the steering committee for the Centerstone Suicide Prevention. She also is the project director for the Building Strong Families and Ties federal grant. She has her master's degree in clinical psychology from Murray State University and is also a licensed professional counselor and has been since 2001. And she also provides supervision, which she got that designation in 2016. Thank you all from Centerstone for presenting on this topic, and we really do appreciate the information that we're sure to receive today. Before we begin, I just wanted to touch base and remind everyone about how we utilize the chat function to ask questions. If you have a question during the question and answer portion, please use the chat function, which is demonstrated here on the screen. You can either make your question so everyone can view it, or you can make it private. But again, we will allow questions towards the end of the webinar. At this time, I'll go ahead and pass the baton over to Mandy, who will begin talking about the learning objectives for the webinar. Thank you, Mandy.
Thanks, Jasmine. Our learning objectives for today from this webinar are to identify how to address self-harm and self-injury in all age groups, identify the impact bullying and cyberbullying has on members, identify ways to support parents whose children face these issues, and identify how to coordinate with the school system. So there's many factors that contribute to suicide among adults. Some of those we see, and a lot of times the individuals will have multiple factors, so it may not just be one of these, but it may be numerous of these. So you'll see relationship problems. You may see that there was a crisis in their past, or they may be upcoming in the next 2 weeks, so it could be an anniversary of a crisis that they've had in the past. You'll also sometimes see some problematic issues with substance use. There may be physical health problems that are compounding. There can be job, financial, legal, criminal issues, or loss of housing. When you're looking at suicide in children and adolescents, you'll see a lot of times those causes and factors may be different. So when you're looking at children, a lot of time that decision is very impulsive on them. And it could be related to some sadness, some confusion, or some anger that is going on in their life. With an adolescent, a lot of times you'll see issues related to stress that they're going through, whether it's stress from school, stress from home life. There'll also be sometimes self-doubt. A lot of adolescents feel the pressure to succeed through school, and they may be getting pressure at home. And then we're also starting to see suicide related to bullying and cyberbullying. And so we'll go into that in a little more detail and how that you can really address that. The ways that you really want to look at addressing self-harm and injury, first you want to identify. So identify individuals with a suicide risk via a comprehensive screening or assessment. You want to engage all individuals at risk for suicide using a suicide care management plan. You want to treat suicidal thoughts and behaviors using evidence-based treatments, and then you want to transition these individuals through care with warm handoffs and supportive contacts. So we'll look at each one of these and what each one of these entail. So identify. You really want to use a screening and use an evidence-based tool to be able to identify and screen and assess suicide risk among all of our clients that are receiving care. You want to be able to ask about suicide at every visit. The Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale is an evidence-based tool, and it's one that we utilize here at Centerstone, but it's used across the country. The link that's provided here provides a free training, so if it's something that you're utilizing or something that you're looking at utilizing, this is a great training that's free to everyone to be able to know how to use this scale. But this scale is also used within behavioral health organizations, but also primary care can use it as well, and then you're also seeing more and more faith-based, more community-based is really utilizing this tool. And this tool is made up of two initial questions. The first question looks at is the client endorsing any thoughts about wishing to be dead or not alive anymore? And then the next one goes into non-specific active suicidal thoughts, like are they having any thoughts related to actually killing themselves? Those first two questions then give you the idea if you need to move forward and do a full assessment and screening on the individual, or if the individual isn't having any of those thoughts and your screening is done. If a client is having any of those thoughts and answer yes to either of those questions, then you can move forward to looking at any active suicidal ideation with any methods and going over what those methods are. You'll also look to see if there's some intent to act, but there may not be a plan yet. And then you're going to look at if there is a plan, what is that specific plan and what is their intent. You can also then move into identifying the intensity of this ideation, how frequently are they having these thoughts, and then do they have any suicidal behavior in the past? Have there been any actual attempts? As we know, if individuals have attempted in the past, they're more likely to attempt again. If there was an interrupted attempt or an attempt where it was aborted. And you can also then look to see if they're doing any preparatory acts. So are they gathering the medication that they may have decided that they're going to move towards suicide towards? Have they gotten any other lethal means? And then what is if they ever had something in the past, what happened? Did they have any damage? Was there any injury to them in the past? And this can then move on to once you've identified is this individual at risk, then you can move on engaging this individual. So you would want to look at making a suicide care management plan for the individuals who may have addressed and stated that they are having those suicidal ideations. We at Centerstone have a suicide care pathway. So any individuals who we screen who either answer those questions yes, or we have a feeling that this person may be answering the question no, but a lot of their behavior is actually saying yes, then we would want to put them in a suicide care pathway plan. By doing this, one of the things you want to do is really counsel on access to lethal means. This really provides you an opportunity to reduce those means, so whether it is firearms, medication, and also gets family involvement, because that is very important in making sure that the access to those lethal means have been reduced. This website here does a great training on how to be able to have those conversations with the client and as well with the family, because you really want to have family involvement. The next part of a care management plan for suicide is to look at a safety plan. And so here is the Stanley Brown safety plan. There is a free template. If you don't have a safety plan that your organization is using, then this allows you to be able to use this as a template. What a safety plan is this a document that really includes coping strategies that may be used for individuals or agencies when a client is in crisis. You really want to review these safety plans with the client when you're seeing them and update them anytime that that's needed. And this should be for any of the clients that you've put in that care management plan that have had that history or they have a current suicide ideation. And in the safety plan, you're going to look at what are their warning signs. You're also going to look at internal coping strategies, things that they can do to take their mind off of the suicide. You're also going to look at who are the individuals, the people, the social settings that can provide a distraction to them when they're having those thoughts. You're going to get them to identify a few individuals who they can ask for help. You're also going to look at agencies or professionals that they can contact during a crisis, and then how can they make that environment safe. And by developing this safety plan with individuals, it moves you into that direction of how can you keep them safe when they're having these thoughts. The next thing is we really want to make sure that we're providing treatment for the individuals who are having these suicidal thoughts. And we need to make sure that they're having effective evidence-based treatment that's really directed at targeting that suicidal. Short-term actions like hospitalization to keep individuals safe are not a substitute for that ongoing concern or for the need of better treatment from outpatient providers, because generally that feeling doesn't just disappear once they've discharged from the hospital. So as health link providers, we really want to make sure that our individuals are having those appointments with therapy, they're having appointments with their med providers if there's been med changes, and that they're also, that we're in contact with the PCPs to make sure the PCP realizes that the individual is on a suicide pathway, they've had these thoughts, so they can be better prepared to be able to help them if the individual expresses those thoughts when they're seeing them. We also want another evidence base that you see that is very helpful for these individuals is having a non-demand caring contact. So these can be just postcards or letters or telephones or that in-person contact, just letting the person know how that you care about them during this difficult time. And so through HealthLink, providing that patient and family support for the individuals during this time has shown to be very effective to be able to help individuals. The other area that you want to look at is transition. So you want to provide a continuous contact and support during these individuals, especially after they've been discharged from an acute care setting. There needs to be ongoing communication during this transition and then afterwards to where you could have telephone calls, home visits, visits with them when they're coming into the clinic. That's been most proven and powerful suicide prevention intervention. Statistics show that a person is most likely to make another suicide attempt within 90 days post-discharge, with that heightened risk being 14 days following discharge. And so that's why it's very important. All of our individuals need that 7-day psychiatric hospital discharge appointment. And so as a HealthLink staff, our contacts with them does not count as that follow-up, but we can really be that link to making sure that those individuals attend that 7-day hospital discharge appointment. From that appointment, they can make sure they understand their discharge instructions, they can make sure that they have any of their new medications that may have been changed, and they can get back involved in treatment, in therapy, and able to really address these thoughts that they've been having. And then if an individual no-shows for an appointment, you really want to be able to follow up with them to be able to get them back into service and to make sure that they don't fall through the cracks. Wanted to provide y'all with some of the crisis lines. So these may be lines that you're familiar with. that you have already given to your clients. You may have a crisis line already at your organization that your clients utilize, but if you don't, these are great national lines that are very effective. So the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, this one provides free 24/7 confidential support. They also have it where veterans, if they call that line and they press 1, then they're able to talk with other individuals who specialize and are trained and experienced in helping veterans of all ages. And many of those responders are veterans themselves, and that really has been shown to be effective to be able to help veterans. For some individuals, they don't really want to talk to someone, but they're much more comfortable texting. So there is that crisis text line that's available. Here's the number that they can text anytime and be able to talk directly to that trained counselor. And then here are three other areas that are more specific. So the Trevor Lifeline is the leading nation organization that provides crisis intervention and suicide prevention to the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning young people under 25. And so you can see that number here. Trevor Space is actually online peer-to-peer community for this group that can really have support for each other. And then the Trans Lifeline is a group that's dedicated to improving the quality of trans life by responding to those critical needs through our community with the direct services support. So that is the line for those. So we wanted to make sure that you had those. At the end of the presentation, there's also some more resources and some more areas that we've found to be very effective in being able to help our individuals when they are having these thoughts. Ashley is now going to move into talking about how times have changed and what that looks like.
Yes. When we're talking with our clients, it's important to think about how times have changed, and when we're addressing difficult issues, it can really help to put ourselves and think about this perspective. For instance, think about how much times have changed since even the 80s and 90s. On the screen you see where we have a rotary dial phone. Most of us wouldn't know how, or don't use that very often, and especially young people. If you work with any teens, they wouldn't even know how to use it. You might have seen a funny video on Facebook with kids trying to use it. It's you know, a lot of them don't. A map. Many of us don't use paper maps anymore. Or a library card catalog. Most of us don't do that anymore either. We all have all of that on our phones now, our fingertips constantly in this fast-paced society we're in. We all have all that in a phone. So when we're thinking about educating those that we work with, our clients or whomever, we can't always use the same tools that people used forever ago. We have to think about how to adapt this education to meet clients where they are now in this fast-paced society. So if we think a little bit about it, teens are spending more than 9 hours a day consuming some sort of media. We all know teenagers are constantly on their phones. A lot of us adults are as well. And 9 hours a day, that's more than a work day. So constantly on their phones, they're constantly absorbing information, teenagers are. And adults spend over 11 hours per day listening to, watching, reading, or generally interacting with some sort of media. And I know I do, especially at work. I mean, we're constantly online and looking at things. So that really affects how we see the world, how we take in our information, and how we're really learning now. And our clients as well. So this new world that we're all living in, this super tech world that we're all living in, also is bringing new concerns, unfortunately. We all know technology can be wonderful, but technology also has new concerns. For one, general misinformation. Everyone now has instant access to information. Unfortunately, much of the information found is misinformation. In fact, I just read an article this morning about how teens don't recognize misinformation or so-called fake news. They are believing most everything they read. A false story story online reaches 1,500 people 6 times quicker on average than a true story does. And while false stories outperform the truth on every subject, including business, terrorism, war, science, technology, entertainment, fake news about politics regularly does best. So unfortunately, misinformation is doing well online. Another new concern that's scary, cyberbullying. In some rare but highly publicized cases, some kids have turned to suicide. Experts say that kids who are bullied and the bullies themselves are at higher risk for suicidal thoughts, attempts, and completed suicides. About 1 in 4 teens have been the victims of cyberbullying, and about 1 in 6 admit to having cyberbullied someone. So there's scary stuff out there online and in this new world. And I know Cindy's going to talk a little bit more about cyberbullying later. In this fast-paced world also affecting us adults, we have this fast-paced lifestyle. We're all constantly checking email, answering phone calls, watching webinars, and everything else all at the same time. It's a lot of pressure. So professionals and suicide. According to the CDC, from 2000 to 2016, in the U.S., the suicide rate among working-aged adults increased 34%, from 12.9 per 100,000 population to 17.3. Occupational groups with the highest rates of suicide for men: construction, jobs such as carpenters, electricians, art, design, entertainment, sports and media, installation, maintenance, and repair. And occupational groups with the highest rate of suicide for women: art, design, entertainment, sports, and media. Protective service jobs such as firefighters, law enforcement workers, and criminal investigators. And then healthcare support such as nursing assistants, home health aides, and medical transcriptionists. So constant pressure everywhere. So what do we do about this? Well, a way that we like to educate here at Centerstone, and something that we've done, is we try to meet people where they are, especially with young people, and in the times we're in. If we can try to meet people where they are and look for resources that entertain as well as educate, it's going to be easier to get through to the client. So a case study in this, basically, that we did here at Centerstone, and how we thought outside the box, is we have created a comic book series dealing with multiple topics, such as depression, as well as other mental health topics, and on risky behaviors and other triggering behaviors. And how we decided to do this is we were looking for a way to educate teenagers, and we thought, well, what are they doing now? And we found that kids were responding well to comic books. And so we were fortunate enough to have some grant money, and we got to writing, and we worked with our professionals here at Centerstone to create medically and clinically accurate and vetted comic books to educate our young people. And all the comic books have worksheets inside of them that can be used in classrooms or in therapy sessions or what have you. The topics that we decided to address are sexting, for a spark in the sex message that nearly destroys her. We've got underage drinking for spark in the sobering truth, catfishing and online safety with spark caught in the net, and depression and suicide with spark rising from the ashes, and bullying with smokescreen, no time for bullies. When we were making these comic books, we spoke to clients and we spoke to teenagers and asked them what they would like to see in their educational materials. And we created the comic books around what the clients wanted. We asked them what they liked and what they wanted in their education. And we took, what type of superhero they wanted, what type of paper they liked for a paper comic book to feel like, what kind of colors, what kind of illustration they liked. We asked them how they wanted to be educated, and then we met them in their leisure life, essentially, when they were already being entertained, and we snuck education into that entertainment, and we made sure that it looked authentic and not cheesy. So I invite you to look at these comics at centerstonecomics.org. They're all available online to be viewed online for free. And if you have any questions about the comic books, feel free to ask me. There's a link to contact me right there on centerstonecomics.org, and you can ask me, or if you need some paper copies, I might be able to send some your way as well. So I'm going to pass it on to Cindy to talk a little more about these online dangers.
Moving on, as you can see, I wanted to look a little bit at who's online and how many of us are online. So this top graphic shows that here in 2019, 69% of people have used social media to connect with one another. So that's 7 out of 10 people, that's how we're connecting. And so that's why we at Centerstone are thinking about how we're using our messaging, how we're talking to people, how we're getting to people to help them think about suicidality, how we're helping them think about how they connect, how we're safety planning, how we're getting our messaging out, because we know that people are online. And then we began to look at, if you go back just to 2005, only 5% of people at that point were connecting online. And so it's a brand new world in just 14 years. And so if you even go back a little bit further, then it's a completely different world. And then if you go down to by the bottom, the social media use by age, you see that 18 to 29-year-olds, 88% of people are using social media. And then it just goes down a little bit from there. But if you notice, it looks like most people are online. In fact, even up to 65-year-olds, 64% are online. And so then there's another scary statistic, which is that with increased social media comes increased depression. Now, we don't know that increased social media increases depression. It may be that increased depression increases the use of social media. But we do know some things about what happens when you get online a lot. We know that using social media makes your brain want more likes. It's kind of like an addiction in the way that this is the Darmic study, by the way, where the brain needs likes. The neurotransmitter dopamine. Whenever we get a like, we get a surge in the neurotransmitter dopamine, and that's really reinforcing. And so the more likes we get, the more reinforcement we get, and the more we want that. And that feels really good, especially to somebody who's depressed. And so then when you remove ourselves from social media, we feel sad, we feel depressed, we feel fearful, and so we need another hit of social media, and so we go back. And if you think about it, a lot of times people understand that, and advertisers understand that, and that's why they're advertising more and more on social media, and they're advertising online, because they know that we become addicted to our phones, we become addicted to our social media presence. And so if you think about that, that's why a lot of times people are getting really depressed the more the time they spend online. But then there's this other thing that's called the emotional contagion effect, and that's the Ferrara and Yang. And I encourage you to go in and read both of those studies. They're really interesting if you're kind of nerdy like me and like to get into the research. And that is looking at what happens, that there's this involuntary transmission of emotionality based on people. We know that if face-to-face, if you're with a happy person, then a lot of times you feel happier. And if you're with a sad person, you can feel sadder. But what we have found now is that if you're online and you read a sad thing, you're likely to feel sadder. And then what we also know is that with social media, that they have metrics. So they figure out what you're clicking on and what you're looking at. And so the more you click on something, the more it sends you more of that information. And so there's this contagion effect, so that you can kind of get into this bubble where you're looking at more and more sad information, or more and more mean information or more angry information. And so you can get into this sort of echo chamber of happiness or sadness or anger. And then if you jump into somebody says something negative about you or to you, then you can see how social bullying can become a big deal, because then there's kind of a piling on effect. Then that really goes into the cyberbullying. The bully or the group of bullies, they may be completely anonymous online. So you have to think about that sometimes people feel kind of powerful, and they feel like that they can say anything or do anything. And then the person who is being bullied may feel like that they don't have any recourse, and sometimes they don't. It's not contained in space or time. There may be no safe place. If any of you, and many of us were, had some bullying experience at school maybe, then when you went home, a lot of times you were safe from that. But if you're connected to your social devices and you keep feeling the need to go back and back and back again because you're a little bit addicted to that device, then there's really no safe place away from the bullying. Cyberbullying incidents may go viral, meaning that an untold number of people can witness. So they can see the child, the teens, the adults' painful experiences. They can even join in. Most online bullies lack that remorse because they have the sense that their actions aren't real. You know, if you hit somebody, you know you hit somebody, and that feels like a real thing that you did. But if you say something mean online, you think, oh, it's just online, maybe, but that's not exactly the emotional effect of it. And then children or teens especially, this is not necessarily for adults, but children and teen victims, they may fear that telling about their pain to their parents or their caregivers could result in them losing their social media access or their phones, and they don't want to do that. And so sometimes the result of telling to get help may feel too high, so that sometimes they may not share if they're getting cyberbullied. So then there's some online safety tips, and this is for anyone. This is not just for children and teens, although this applies to them as well, but it's also for adults as well. We encourage people not to respond to bullies. That just gives them more power. Do block and report bullies. That protects you and others. If you can't do it for yourself, do it for somebody else. Don't retaliate. That gives the other person the control. You have to stay in your own values. Don't dip into their level. Do stay civil. Don't think it will just go away. It's really unlikely to go away by itself. Do save any evidence. You take screenshots, use your phones, take a photo. Don't bully others, and do be an ally. Don't be ashamed if somebody bullies you, and do seek help. And so then we want to go to what the effects of cyberbullying are. They're the same. They're exactly the same as in-person bullying. Depression, suicidality, anxiety, any host of emotional and mental health disorders that can come with being a bully, can come with being bullied, also come from being cyberbullied. And then, of course, that can also happen you can be bullied in school, you can be bullied online, you can be bullied anywhere. You can be bullied at work, for that matter. But a lot of times parents, when their children have been bullied or their teens have been bullied, they don't know what to do, because a lot of times if we were bullied as children, our parents didn't know what to do. And so we don't know how to break that cycle. So that's what we want to help our parents that we work with know what to do if that occurs. So here's just a little bit of education around it. Just know that schools miss more than 95% of bullying incidents. And why is that? Because kids are really smart, and they know to do that, they know that to bully each other in the unstructured places. Rarely do kids bully one another in the classroom setting. They're going to do it in hallways, bathrooms, lunchroom, playgrounds, buses, locker rooms, walking to and from portable classrooms, which are more and more common in schools today, or in any unstructured area where school personnel just can't see. So if a child does come to you or to the parents of somebody you work with and ask for help, what needs to happen? I want you to notice there's some sources at the bottom of the page. There's stopbullying.gov, and then there's rightslaw.com. Both of those are I pulled this information from, and they're both a wealth of great information. So this would be a great place to go if you have parents or if you just want to educate yourself. Ask the child what he or she has already tried, humoring, ignoring, you name it. A lot of times kids come forward and they say what's happening. I only want to give them advice. The first thing to do is just listen. Just listen to what they've tried and assume that whatever they've tried in the moment, it was the right thing. Did they run away? Did they sit quietly? Did they make a joke out of it? Whatever they did, it was probably the right thing at the right time. And then gather any information that help the parent gather the information. What happened? When did it happen? How many times did it happen? What was the other person's name? And you're going to want to help people try to speak the language of the school, which means try to remove emotion as much as possible. It's going to be hard because, when you hear that a child is hurting, it's really hard not to get mad and come over the top. I know I can get that mother bear thing going too, but that's what we need to try to remove and not do in the moment, is try to speak in a very factual manner, bring times, places to the school. So we want to help parents learn to be ready to be supportive, brave, and calm at all times. Then, the second part is to meet and plan. Begin with a discussion with the teacher, the school counselor. We want to work together to create a plan that's going to keep the child safe. Take notes during that meeting. Get the plan in writing, even if it's informal, and then move up the chain of command as needed. Then send a follow-up email after the meeting. Send it as a thank you note. I appreciate you meeting with me. This is what we agreed that we were going to do. This was wonderful. This is what I hope is going to happen. And then stay in weekly contact with the people who are at the meeting. Let them know how things are going. Your goal as a parent of a child who's being bullied is to be a pleasant yet persistent advocate for your child's needs. And then utilize all your allies through collaboration. Does that mean that the librarian is somebody that your child goes to? Make sure that they're pulled in on those meetings. And that's what we want to help parents do, is find all the people who can be pulled in to be an ally for the child. And then allies and advocacy. Who might that be? Who might that look like? Mental health providers, obviously, psychiatrists, doctors, occupational or physical therapists, specific education or advocacy rights groups, informal supports like faith leaders, babysitters, tutors, extended family, law enforcement or juvenile justice. And then what we want to do after we've had one of those meetings is make sure that you write down those meeting notes. Maybe it's an email, and then you're going to want to share all that information with all the providers all the way around. And I created this graphic at the top just to show the way that we need to share information with everybody all the way around. There needs to be nobody who has one piece of the information. Everybody needs to have all the pieces, but it needs to be concise. And so if you can have a nugget that's shared with everybody all the time. I used to have grand meetings where everybody involved in the child's life came, and we sat around a meeting at the table and we talked things through, and those are great, and I still love those meetings. However, that's not always possible. But what is possible always is to send an email, or to send out meeting notes, or to gather information, or to make phone calls, or maybe even a conference call, kind of like the one that we're on right now. We can use technology to get really creative, to get everybody at the table, even if we're not at a physical table. So HealthLink is often that glue that bonds everybody together. And then if we can help parents learn to be the glue, then that's really where success comes in. And then this last slide, I think, is the major important part, is understand that adults' efforts to affect change when any type of bullying occurs are impactful for preventing depression and suicidal feelings. Showing that you're determined to persist until all your child's needs and concerns are adequately addressed is deeply validating. A parent's willingness not to give up until things are better communicates that their concerns are valid, their safety is vital, and that they're worthy of your time and effort. And I want to back that up for a second. That is very true for children, but it's also true for adults. And if you think about it, that's what our work is as mental health clinicians and as HealthLink providers and as psychiatrists and anybody who works in this field. We're validating people. And the more that we can validate and connect people to resources, the more that we can help them know that their feelings are valid, their time is valid, and that they are valid, a lot of that times that's when that self-harm and those suicidal ideations and suicidal feelings, a lot of times that's when those feelings begin to diminish and to even go away. It's when they begin to feel validated and heard and cared about. A lot of times that connection is the thing that saves people.
So before we move on to questions, just because we have a little bit of time, I wanted to share with you some of these great resources that are very helpful when you're looking at this. So SAMHSA's Suicide and Prevention Resource Center has great topics and educations and toolkits that are really helpful when you're looking at how can you provide additional resources. Also, Zero Suicide. So a lot of you may have heard of this initiative, and it's an initiative that we've adopted here at Centerstone, is looking at how can you make suicide preventable. And in a behavioral health organization, your goal should always be zero suicide. And so this link here will give you resources on how to either make your agency that way or also look at different toolkits that you can use. Also, the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention provides great resources. Below are just some PDFs and documents that you can be able to provide to clients and to staff that they can look at the relationship between bullying and suicide, what we know and what it means. This is a great PDF document that CDC has done that you can share with any of our clients who are having bullying. A Chat Safe is a young person's guide for communicating safely online about suicide. So sometimes we know that people always say that when you're talking about suicide, that's going to make kids want to do it more, but we've also learned from resources that that's not the case, that you really need to be talking about it and asking those questions. Help a Friend in Need. This is about a Facebook and Instagram guide to be able to help individuals. So these are really good resources that you can be able to provide to clients, the last three for sure, but then the top three are more resources that you can use as a provider to be able to gather more information. They're constantly updating these to provide more information.
I saw a question from Jasmine pop up.
Okay. And then you want to share these? So these are some resources that Ashley's going to share with you.
Okay.
They're a little different, huh?
Okay. Suicide and social media, a tip sheet for parents and providers. And then what to do if you're concerned with your teen's mental health, a conversation guide. Those are just two good resources. And then centerstone.org/teen. That's our Centerstone's teen website, and it has lots of great information about health, drugs, alcohol, drugs, relationships, and more. Media safety. We have a lot of information that we've compiled there. And then, of course, centerstonecomics.org, which I talked about earlier. Kidshealth.org is a great resource for middle and high school students. Great just general health website for parents and kids alike to look, the middle and high school age. Loveisrespect.org is a great website on relationship and dating violence. Great for if you have or know of anyone that is having issues with unhealthy relationships. And then itgetsbetter.org is a great bullying, anti-bullying website.
Great. So now we'll open up the chat for any questions that you may have. One of the questions that we have so far are what is some example of goals to be added to the care plan in order to monitor suicide? So that's a great question. So when you're looking at developing your goals and objectives with the care plan, with HealthLink, one of the things that you can do when you're talking to the client is looking at building that social support. So that could be one of their goals and objectives is do they have the social support that they can be able to work with individuals on. Within our care plan, one of the things that we do is we put our crisis plan within our care plan, so we update that every time to make sure that we have that, so we can know when a person's in crisis, who do they go to, what are some of their coping strategies, what are some of their safety issues, so that way you can address that. You can also look at, appointments, reminders. You can also look at medication compliance. You can also look at goals and objectives under emotional behavioral health related to following all your treatment recommendations, some strategies that you need to do to be able to beat distractions when you're having those thoughts. Another question is, how can you start the conversation with a teen who's closed off related to talking about suicide? You want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me pull it back up. Yeah, pull it back up so I can read the whole thing, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
How should you start off the conversation with a teen who is closed off related to talking about suicide? Okay, that is super common. What we have done, I think, at Centerstone is that we do the CSSRS every single time that we see a client, and so we make suicidality an ongoing conversation. Our clients know that every time we see them or that we have contact with them, we're going to ask those questions. And so suicide is not a taboo subject. And a lot of times our teens and our kids don't want to talk about suicide because they fear that if they mention those feelings that we're immediately going to hospitalize them. And sometimes that has been true in the past, especially for some mental health providers, and that has been much more about our fear than about what research shows us is actually effective. And so what we have learned to do is help them understand that that can be an ongoing conversation, that they can talk about those feelings, and as long as we can create a viable safety plan that is workable and that will actually address their safety, that there will be no need to hospitalize. But obviously, if we can't create a workable safety plan, or if we can't feel like that we can get them safe, then we will need to have them assessed, and that will be a possibility. We try to be really honest and upfront, and so I think that's what we do, is that if we give teens adequate information and we build the trust, then those conversations kind of come from that. And then who should you notify if a client attempts suicide? For us, it depends on the age. I work a lot of times in school-based services and intensive in-home. So a lot of times the people that I work with are under 18. And so actually even under 16 and 17. And so if the child is 15 or below, we're going to have to let the parents know, obviously. We're going to have to sometimes let the schools know, depending on the necessity of that, and then if we have adequate releases. We definitely need to let the primary care physician know. We need to let any kind of outside mental health providers know. We need to it depends on how many and what kinds of mental health and physical health providers that they have involved in their life. Have I left out anybody that you can think of?
No, sometimes you may need to let the managed care organization know.
Absolutely.
And so also you want to make sure that you have releases, but then you also want to be a support to that family. So hopefully you've had a release to where you can be a support to that family during that time. One of the next questions is, who should be involved in developing a safety plan? And that really needs to be everyone. Everyone needs to be involved in that, but whoever's initially talking to the client when they first address those issues, they need to be the ones that are starting that safety plan and developing that. But you need family involvement. You can't just do the safety plan with just the client and not have that family involvement, because they're going to be the support that the client leaves when they're not with us. And they won't be with us all the time. So you need to involve all of their family and all of their support systems to help really make sure that you have an effective safety plan that can be developed with the client. Can you give examples of how to talk to parents of kids who are suicidal? How do you educate them on following through the safety plan?
Ooh, that is a tough one. We do that all the time, every day. And the first place we begin is letting parents understand that very little children are also at risk of suicide, that suicide is the second highest leading cause of death in children ages 6 through 11. A lot of people do not know that. And so they think, oh, this is an 8-year-old, he's saying he wants to harm himself, but little kids don't mean that. They're just doing it for attention. And sadly, that is not generally the case. If a child is saying that they want to harm themselves, they're saying it for a reason. And so that's the first place we start. We start helping parents understand that small children or teenagers, for that matter, can be suicidal, and that is very real, and that we want to take every statement seriously. And then the second place we go is, and let's say that they are doing it for attention. Let's assume that you're correct. Do you want to be wrong? What are the consequences of taking something seriously that's not true, or versus not taking something seriously that is true? And a lot of times, by the time we get the parent to that place in their mind, they go, okay, you're right, we can plan around this. And it's a pretty quick process to get them to think about that, what could happen. And then as soon as we do that, a lot of times we can get them thinking about the safety plan and following through with the safety plan and considering what that means, which means a lot of times, locking out sharps in the house, or it can mean checking on the child periodically throughout the day. That might be, not letting the child close their bedroom door at night, or not letting the child be able to leave the house, so maybe putting alarms on the door so that just it's going to ding if everybody's sleeping, something along those lines. There's a lot of different ways that you can create safety, and a lot of times parents are really creative if we engage them in that process, depending on what natural supports can be created. It's just a matter of the first thing you got to do is get somebody on board, and then as soon as that happens. Now, sometimes parents are not following through the safety plan, and then that becomes a different conversation and obviously much more serious.
What are some strategies that THL care coordinators can use if they suspect a member is having suicidal thoughts or engaging in self-harm behaviors when it isn't part of their care plan? So that's where you want to make it as part of your questioning, so they know that every time you're going to see them, you're going to ask about those suicidal. So that's where you need to screen each person, regardless if it's on their care plan or not, to if they're having these thoughts of suicidal ideation. If they are, then that's where you then need to move into engaging them. Do you put them on a suicide pathway? Do you increase your intensity with them? Do you increase the amount of contacts with them? Do you look at then moving in to, reducing lethal access, developing that safety plan? And that's where we said not, even if individuals are having, they're denying all those thoughts, but their behaviors are still reflecting that they may be having suicide. You notice that they're much more depressed. You may have done a PHQ-9 on them, and their depression score has increased a lot. They're talking about giving a lot of their possessions away. They're talking about different ideas that doesn't actually say suicide, and they're denying all those questions, but they're still giving you that thoughts. That's where you want to move into, let's develop this safety plan and let's talk about this and get family support in. And that's where one of the things that we do, regardless, when an individual comes out of the hospital and they've had a previous suicide attempt, even if that individual says, I'm not suicidal anymore, we still put that person on the pathway, because as you know, their risk increases after that discharge. So every single person that comes out of the hospital that's had a suicide attempt is going to be on the pathway. One of the other things we do with the pathway is it automatically notifies us if an individual that's on the pathway misses an appointment. If they miss an appointment with us, then one of their staff members is going to call them as soon as they miss that appointment to try to engage them and get them back into services. If we try numerous times to be able to reach out to them by phone, it then moves up to where our crisis team is calling and reaching out to them. We're sending letters to their homes, and even in some cases, we're going to do that drive where we'll go out to their home to see them. And when we put people on the pathway, we let them know that this is part of your care now, is that we want to be able to provide higher contact with you. And if you don't show, we're going to keep calling you and reaching out to you until we get a hold of you, because we want to make sure that you're safe and that you feel cared for during those times. How can THL teams coordinate with the primary care providers and pediatricians to address members with self-harm and suicidal behavior? That's a really great question, and that's one of the things that we really want to be able to do. So one of the things we do is when we put someone on the pathway, we can reach out to the primary care provider to let them know this person has expressed suicide. So when they're seeing them, they can make sure that they're asking those questions and that they are looking at them. A lot of times our primary care providers don't feel very equipped to ask these questions and to really know how they can work with someone when they do express suicide. And so that's where you can become that partner for them, to where when, they can have different trainings that you can provide with them, that you can talk with them about what to do when a person does that they start screening the clients when they come to them. As we've seen, most individuals who've had a suicide attempt or have had ideation have actually seen either a mental health specialist or a primary care provider within the weeks before they commit suicide. So letting them know they're in the pathway, letting them know that that they need to increase intensity, that they need to be talking with them, that there are numbers and resources that they can utilize if they have an individual who's coming into their client, into their office to get further assessed if they're having those thoughts. Can you talk about how to use safety plans with members who have suicidal thoughts or behaviors or self-harms? So with the safety plan, you really want to go over all of those questions and make sure that the individual feels like this is their safety plan. You don't want to develop a plan that is you developed and the patient and client doesn't have any membership to that. You want to make sure that they actually have the membership and that they consider this their safety plan. So what are those warning signs that a crisis may be developing so they can start looking for those? You want to figure out what are those internal coping strategies that the individual has that they can start working on when they start having those thoughts. Who can help provide them interaction? So a lot of times individuals can have distractions that can help them when they start to have those thoughts. Who can they ask for help? So you really want to look, what are those individuals that who can help you when you have those thoughts? Not just the agencies, you want that too, but they need support within their family, within their friends that can provide that to them. And then you want to make that environment safe. In the safety plan, that's where you're going to do that counseling of access to lethal means. You want to make sure that we've removed all of those lethal means that they've talked about utilizing to be able to do this.
Thank you, Mandy and Ashley and Cindy, for joining us today. We got a lot of great questions, and I really appreciated you guys taking the time to be so thorough and detailed, not only in the presentation, but with answering the questions as well. If you guys have additional questions, you can always reach out to me, and I can forward them to Mandy and her team. If not, always utilize your THL lead and your care coordinator, your administration, to get answers to some of these questions as well. But I want to thank everyone who joined for the webinar, and again, thank you to Centerstone for taking the time to present with us. And we'll go ahead and conclude this webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.